Okay, YouTubers, this is Joe from Artanian TV. Another quick game of Interplanetary I Spy. Back to the moon, back to Apollo missions, and we're on Flickr here. This is where you get all the images from. There are missing magazines here, so I don't know what's happened to all of them, but there is a lot on this site. They've got over 14,000 images, but unfortunately I can't find the link to this image because they've moved it. I think they may have added more magazines and more photos to the archive here, because there's a lot more on here, I think, than there were when I first looked. So it will take me a while to find the original, well, the new page that the image is on, and it's, for some reason it doesn't have the proper name either. I downloaded the image and it doesn't have the proper Apollo name in the title, which is quite annoying, so I can't Google it, so I'm going to have to physically go through and re-find it. But apart from that, let's crack on with it anyway. This is the image. Doesn't look much when you first look at it, but I thought that's a nice looking crater there, and I always like to look inside craters, because that's often where you find anomalies. If you were going to build anything on a planetoid or moon, the best place to do it would be inside a crater, because it would offer you some protection against radiation. I'm not saying this is a building, and I'm not saying this is even anything really. It could just be a case of pareidolia, but if you look very carefully, there looks to be like a giant head here with two eyes, a nose and the mouth, like a head of a baby or a sort of a alien sort of bold sort of dude. Okay, now I'm not saying that's what it is, I'm just saying this is what it looks like. This is basically a pareidolia exercise we're taking here. So let's get rid of that. I'll show you the enhancements I've done. I'll show you a basic contrast enhancement here, and I've really upped the contrast, and we have a huge head with an ear, two eyes, what look like two eyes, a nose and a mouth. Now I appreciate this is probably just a pile of rocks and rubble and dust and God knows what else in the bottom of this crater here, but I thought, why not? I mean, it's an interesting image. I'm not saying it's a baby, I'm not saying it's a giant head. It could well be a giant head that's carved. There are huge buildings on the moon, huge towers, but this is probably just a bunch of random rocks that just happen to look like a face or a head lying in the bottom of this crater. So I thought I would enhance it anyway and see what it looked like, and I've got the finished result here, where I've really cranked up the contrast just to bring out these details, and it does look like a head, but it's probably a coincidence. But when you see if these are holes or whatever these things are that look like eye sockets or eyes, why would you have two the same size next to each other? Now on the moon or anywhere else in nature for that fact, I always get very suspicious if I see two things exactly the same size next to each other, because Mother Nature doesn't do that really, especially when it comes to rocks and random formations. So maybe this is a carving. I mean, there are massive carvings on Mars. There are huge buildings on Mars. There are, as I've shown, there are large, very, very large bases and huge structures, not only on our moon, but on Ceres. They look to be some on Pluto. They look to be some on almost everywhere you look. Although I have been looking at Mercury and Venus recently and haven't found much there yet. But I've only just started on them. So who knows? Let's show you another colour filter of that. I've got a blue filter on it this time. It sometimes helps to do that, just to see it better, depending on whether you're colourblind or not. The blue does tend to help. And all I've done there is really up the contrast and use the clarify tool, which basically adds even more contrast. So it really brightens up the bright bits and darkens the dark bits. There we go. Is it possible that there's a giant carved edifice of a human like this in a crater on the moon? I don't know how large this crater is, but I imagine it's at least 1 kilometre from end to end, possibly much, much bigger. It may well be 4 or 5 miles across. I'll try and find out, because that's quite important. But either way, this is interesting. Whether this is a mile across or 3 miles across, it's interesting either way. So there we go. I'll just show you how I did that, just to show what process I went through, just to show I'm not drawing stuff in here. This is actually in the image. This is just a raw clip of the image, nothing done to this whatsoever, just cropped out of the larger image. And all I do is add a load of contrast, minus 40 brightness, plus 60 contrast. There we go. Let's do a little bit more. That's not quite enough. Let's go minus 15, plus 15. That's probably a bit too dark, but you can see it already. It'll take a few more steps to get that to look good. Let's try upping the brightness a bit this time. There we go. Let's do that again. You can see it there quite clearly. Eyes, nose, mouth. The question is whether it is actually a carving, or is it actually some buildings, like a couple of domes perhaps, that just happen to look like a face. It could be a bunch of domes here in this crater. People have found what look like mining operations going on in many craters on Mars, including myself, where there are pipes sticking out of some of these craters. There are tracks leading in and out of them. There are huge, great big structures in some of these craters, miles and miles across some of them. So don't write anything off when it comes to places like the moon. Even though these things may not look that serious, these could be domes here. And the reason why they look symmetrical is because they are symmetrical and they've been built. But they just happen to look like a face from this angle. I don't know. I couldn't tell you for sure, but there is no harm in speculation. And as I've said before, let's darken that a bit, see if that helps. There we go. So you can see that quite clearly. See these two dome-like structures, black domes, and there's another one here, sort of thing. You know, as I've said before, dismissing everything as pareidolia, or saying we've never been to the moon, saying we've never been to Mars, saying we've never been to Mercury or Venus or Charon or Ceres or anywhere else. Why is it people who say these things only say this about NASA? What about Russia? What about China? What about India? What about all the other countries that have been to space and sent probes? The European Space Agency, we sent probes all over the solar system. But people only seem to make these comments about NASA for some reason. I'm not defending NASA, because they do lie, they do manipulate images, but most of these images are perfectly normal. They've been scanned in at a very high resolution, 300 ppi, pixels per inch, and they're very good quality. The problem is, because the moon is quite bright, they look kind of bleached out, so the only way you can really see any detail in these images properly without having to squint and give yourself eye strain is to up the contrast, and that's all you have to do. You don't need a specific program to do that. Let's go back to that. You just got to up the contrast and go in quite hard with it. Minus 20. Let's go again. Let's go again. And these things just start to pop out. That's all you have to do. Let's go a bit brighter. Let's go to that one. Let's try that. So it's definitely there. I'll show you my enhancements again. I'll flick through these one by one. There's the raw image. Heavy contrast added. There I've darkened parts of it just to bring out some of the detail. Now I've added a colour filter and brightened it some more. Different colour filter. And then a negative image. Okay, so it's there. I'm not making this up. It is down to interpretation. I suspect actually that these are probably domes that have been built inside the crater and just happened to look like a face or head from this angle. That's my opinion. It's not a crime to speculate, as some people think it is. I'm getting heavily trolled at the moment for some reason. But that's YouTube. A lot of people on YouTube are very childish, and there seems to be a lot of fundamentalists on there at the moment who are trying to force their views onto other people, which is not something I approve of. Okay, so thanks for watching, everybody. I will try and find the link to this, but it may take me some time because they seem to have moved a lot of the images on Flickr. So thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.